Friday. Welcome back
Yes.
to another week of People Rising. It's great to see you guys today.
It's going to be
It
a
is
good
that.
one. It is going to be a good one. I'm excited.
Yeah, we have with us today. I'll give her a more extended introduction just before she comes out. But Niven Postma, who is an organizational expert, an office politics expert, women's leadership. I'm really excited to have her on the show today. I mean, who hasn't stepped in it when it comes to office politics?
Well, if it's on the floor, I've stepped in it. I mean, I just put it out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we really hope that people will, engage, ask questions. Shelly brought up something that I think is pretty important. Shelly, why don't you go
Yeah.
ahead and...
So, hello, everybody. So really quickly by intro, I got it together because Niven's here.
Good point.
But-
I forgot to do the intros.
Why you have me going first, I have no idea.
Do it.
All right. So I'm Shelly Jeffcoat. I'm a brand expert, culture builder, podcaster, speaker, author, and obviously a member of the fantastic team we have here. I do want to, I'm not sure why there's a little bit of a delay in my earbuds, but shout out to all the people who are watching from Facebook channels, YouTube, LinkedIn, and I'm not sure that you're. Hello, Katina.
Hey, Katina.
Hello, Katina.
Great to see
there,
you.
There are
Katina.
folks that are going to be watching this call in replay version as well. So I do share that out on YouTube. But the point I made was because of the conversation we're going to have. We may not have a lot of people commenting because you might be dealing with the situation in your current job, and you don't want to say. So I get it. So for those,
you could say a friend of mine was having a problem. I know somebody who.
Yeah, I know some people who are dealing with this right now.
But if you feel comfortable,
Yeah.
please do comment, speak up, and ask questions. Peter.
Yeah. Hi, I am Peter Laughter, and I recognize that we are all deeply and profoundly connected. So I help companies tell stories that allow them to further their connection and fix what's broken about recruiting. And it's funny, I've been an entrepreneur for most of my career, and in 2016 I sold a company and started a new one, and that much larger company invested in my new company, and I had an in to the founder, and it took me a long time to realize he wasn't the powerful one. It was the COO, and it was a crash course in office politics. So I'm a novice to the area, but yeah, it was a fascinating experience for me.
Kim and I are pros.
Well, I think it would be great if we could maybe share some of our own experiences after we finish with the introductions. This is going to be really interesting. Go ahead, Kim.
Hi everyone. So Kim Blue. I actually want to be Shelly when I grow up because Shelly's like broadcasting across all of these channels. And I just got
He's
my
a multimedia juggernaut.
Right. I, on the other hand, just got my YouTube channel established 7 days ago. So I'm getting there. But Kim Blue, HR strategist, career coach, long time in corporate HR. Recently stepped out to dangle my own shingles, and I lead K Blue Consulting, which is my own business. So I am a coach. I call myself every day, right? And people ask me what I do. I'm like, I perform say corporate alchemy or career alchemy, right? And so I'm always like helping people think or trying to turn something that is this piece of lead into some level of gold that will help someone in some way, whether it's a leader, a founder, leaders at all levels, no matter what. And of course, happy to be alongside these fantastic folks. So.
All right. And my name is Linwood Ross. I'm the founder and CEO of Accelerate. We are helping to develop high-performing teams for the modern age. It's a little different than it was, back in the day. So, we talk a lot about those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Here on People Rising. And, today we're talking about office politics, interpersonal relationships in the office, right?
Yes. Yes.
And, Niven says some really interesting things. I want to highly encourage you all to check out Niven's website. I want to just make sure I have the correct URL. Actually, how could I get you know what I'll do? While someone else is talking, I will drop the website actually on my page.
Okay.
So it will pop up as a comment. There we go. Thank you. I should be ready, but I'm not.
That's all right.
That's all right. You won't hold it against me?
No, it's all good.
Actually, can I put it here? Will it work if I put it here?
If you put it in the comments of our live.
There we go.
There you
It
go.
did work.
Yes.
Awesome. How about you learn something
That's
new every time you do the show. So I went on Niven's website, to prepare for the show, and she's got a series of videos. I think it's 12 videos there. They're about a minute, a little more. I highly encourage you to go through them. And she's got some great illustrations. I don't know who's doing her illustrations. You have to share that with us. But one of the things that I did early in my career. Oh, really?
She's doing it, okay?
My
She's
goodness,
doing it herself.
We're hearing from Niven, who's in the green room, is telling us she did the illustrations, which is, amazing.
Fantastic.
Wow. Awesome illustrations. I mean, I'm blown away. She's multi-talented. She has this amazing illustration there, talking about office politics. And one of the things that I did early on in my career, and actually for a really long time, I don't know why I did it, but I think I was make two things that I was doing, she says, you shouldn't do. Number one is I think I was treating the office a little bit like school. Okay. So, expecting, that I'm going to get the A, right? I'm focused. And related to that was just it's all about the work. If I just do good work, that's what will. So I spent quite a bit of time, well, not that much time, but I did spend some time on Niven's website, just going through some of the free materials that she has there. Great little booklet here, Navigating Politics Workbook, which you can just print right out. Seems very helpful. So those are the kind of resources that are available. How about you, Peter? What do you?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to point out something that's a really insidious aspect of our hierarchical structure, is that the people who get rewarded with leadership positions are the ones who are most successful at navigating the politics, as opposed to being the most effective leaders or producers or people. And I think that I'm really interested in hearing about that issue. Because again, not something I've experienced because I've only been in positions where politics is not something I was concerned with, right or wrong, and probably to my detriment as a leader. But I'm really curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I actually was, when you were saying that, I was thinking about, office politics from the C-suite. I mean, I know among the C-suite, there's office politics, and even the CEO has to deal with some level of politics. But, I always thought, when I was in the office, like, the CEO doesn't need another suck up. Right. And,
but they got all sort of them.
They're all over the place.
Yeah, they are.
So I kind of try to approach my dealings with him in a way that was more, I won't say authentic, but I just tried to give him the information that he needed without a lot of shine to it. I don't know whether that was good or bad. He seemed to appreciate it, but I'd love to hear more about that take and the perspective from the CEO's seat.
So I would say I learned about office politics when I was very, very young from my father. And so I'm Jamaican, and he owned some businesses, and I watched him navigate, and I watched others navigate him to get what they wanted. And I would try to figure out, like, why is so and so getting treated differently from so and so. So the seed was always planted that if you want X, that this is the way that this is the way you got to do it. Is, first of all, it's understanding who holds the seat of power and then who has the influence. And the influence wasn't always another, I guess for corporate speak, it wasn't another C-suite person. Sometimes that seat of influence, like the seat of influence, was a woman that was the admin to my dad.
Yep.
Okay?
No, that's like the most important person you have to get close to.
Got to get, yeah. So I learned from just a very long time ago that you do have to understand the environment you were in. And he would always there's 5 of us, taught us what's the difference between power and influence. Which one do you want? But I want power because I want to change things, right? The other part, though, is when I first came into corporate America, this is 1992, my first real job, I was with this organization. There were so many people who were like the feedback I was getting then is like, oh, that's just playing games. You shouldn't have to play the games, blah, blah. Well, I figured out really early, you do have to play the games. If you want your project approved, if you want a budget approved, if you want to actually make some impact and changes, if you want to get, whatever that is, that you do actually have to learn how to move through the organization. So it was always about learning who the key players are, understanding what their needs are. And it's not like doing it in a way that's, I would tell people, like, it's not doing it in a way that it's manipulative. It's gathering information because at some point you're going to need it to help yourself or your team or the project, et cetera. So I think the first step is understanding and accepting that office politics is quite normal. And there's a way that you could use it so that you can help whatever it is, right? The team, the project, et cetera. It's just a matter of how do you navigate through all of those things and realize that there's going to be times when that you're not going to be the one that's on the receiving end of the good. That there's going to be times when it's going to work against you. So how do you how do you bounce back when office politics blows up in your face?
That really sounds very insightful. I mean, I'm no expert, but that sounded good.
Thanks. It's Friday, and we have a great guest. I had to pull it together.
I just think it's so, what a wonderful opportunity you had to, as a young person, see your father operating and learn so much from it. I mean, absolutely. I think, sometimes we have not so good influences. You had a good one, and if you don't have that person who kind of is cluing you in really early,
then you miss out.
There's tremendous value there. There's tremendous value there.
That's why you should also have mentors, right? I talk about mentorship all the time. This is kind of one of the things that a mentor will be able to help you through is how do you respond when you're in a situation where maybe you don't even know there's politics at play, right? So it's being open, first of all, to this thing and understanding that this is actually happening, and how do you tap into
this is happening.
This is really happening. But I know the politics, and I play my part. I always tell people I play chess. I don't play checkers.
That is too good. Thank you so much. So Kim, what are your thoughts?
So I think when I hear office politics, what always comes to mind is, do people really have the capacity to build relationships? Are they comfortable like advancing in some of those competencies so that they can get better at communication? So that and not just by talking, but also by listening, because oftentimes we talk when we should be listening. And how good are we at building relationships? Relationship building forces people to kind of come out of their bubble a little bit. And so while they might be able to talk the technical talk of it, can the human side of them survive in the midst of all of that? And some people are really great at the politics, right? The actual, I call it the dance or the navigation of not only who's in the room, but what do they know? And what's the thing that they've got either their footprint on, or that they're involved in, that either I want to get closer to or better understand. What do I already know about them? So it's a little, right. So to Shelley's point, right. And sometimes it's chess, sometimes it's wizard chess for anybody who's a Harry Potter fan out there. Oftentimes it can be chess, but sometimes it is the full on, right, the slayage, as I like to say, right then and there. And so it can feel like that, like you think you're stepping into it in one way, and you come out of a conversation, you come out of an interaction trying to figure out like what happened or how you can show up better. So I think it's a combination of understanding like your audience, really like ramping up your interpersonal savvy, and then getting really clear on like what am I communicating? Is this a situation where I need to listen? Or is this a situation where my contribution is going to be additive and I'm not talking just to talk? Because that's the other time people will talk to be recognized or to acknowledge, right? And I don't subscribe to that. If I don't have anything of merit that's going to add value, that's going to increase what's going on, right? I just won't do it. Or I'll wait until after and find the right time to do it, which also goes into a little bit of decision quality. What's the right time to engage in terms of building that relationship? Because oftentimes we think it has to be on this grand stage. It does not, right? You can go do what you need to do. And it doesn't have to be in front of 65 people, right? It could just be you and the one person or the one or two people who really need to be involved. But that comes with a lot of sort of cultural relevance and shifts that happen. So how do we help people get more comfortable navigating the office politics so they don't sacrifice themselves, right? And they can stay true to who they are.
Yeah, that's awesome. What you said there, it actually made me think of all the things that happen, in the back room, so to speak, right? So it's, having the one-on-ones, before and after, I made huge mistakes raising issues in meetings that really should have been raised.
It is a fundamental, it's a fundamental flaw. 100%. Yeah. I mean, we want to be heard and acknowledged. We want to present as if we are plugged in and connected, when in fact it can be diminishing to your brand. It can be right. And then it can sort of deter you from how other people experience you. Right. And so then that's the thing. That people remember, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not dealing with that guy in that space again." Like you were that guy at Linwood. That's who you were, right? In the
well, no, I wasn't that guy, but I wasn't like, you know what it was? It wasn't that I wasn't doing things intentionally.
Right.
It was actually ignorantly, which I don't know if I guess that's worse. I'm not sure, but just not having. I talked about this many times. Just not being aware.
Yes.
Just not being aware of my own power and influence, and therefore I was diminishing it.
Yeah.
Just because I wasn't aware. I just wasn't, thinking about things in that way. I wasn't, very naive, I guess. Like I said, treating it a little bit like school, like, and it's easy to do that, as a lawyer, because, many times you're coming right out of law school or a law firm. And in most law firms, it's very, you're working very independently on documents or what have you. And then you go into a corporate environment that's very different. They often talk about the difference between law school and business school. It's, business school, they're spending, what is it, 90% of your time networking in business school? I don't know who's been to business. It's not that bad, but people do talk about how, there's a lot of times in business school spent networking and working on relational skills. And that just is not emphasized in law school at all.
it's a skill that, I mean, it's like a muscle you have to build, and over time it can atrophy. So there are some skills that I've learned. Listen, there's some skills I learned the hard way. Okay, so just like you led with, there's some times I was like, why did I even bother? Or if someone wants to do like, let's debrief after the meeting, when I know in my gut I don't want to debrief with you because you're just trying to convince me otherwise, right? You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to debrief because of also the optics. So I had to learn also what was happening around me, the optics and the perception. So we touched a little bit on this, I think, last week in our conversation, is just being aware of, what role I'm playing in office politics as well. And so just again, just being mindful. So one of the things that I had to do, I learned, is I would be in the back. Sometimes I'd just be in the back of the room, to Kim's point, and I'm just listening. And so I'm listening to C-suite, I'm listening to admins, I'm listening to middle. I'm just soaking it in. I'm just listening because I want to know who's on the board, literally like the chessboard, right? I want to know what the pieces are, and really get a better understanding, instead of trying to solve the problem as in like, who do I need to know? I'm solving it from a different perspective. Like, what do I need to know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say this to what you just said, Shelley. People also aren't comfortable with like that silence. Right?
Yes.
Plenty of time in my career, right? I've sat in meetings and have
Yes.
just been observing, and someone will say, Kim, do you have anything to add? And I'll say, no, I'm actually just listening. And
Yeah.
it catches people off guard.
Yeah.
It's almost like, if I don't contribute, well, am I capturing everything? Like, is it making sense? But part of me listening is me making my own meaning. If I'm talking and not learning from somebody else, how am I then going to be able to either translate it later or help some, figure it out, so that I know, okay, this is where I fit into whatever they're talking about. But people aren't comfortable with you just listening. It's like, you got to say something so that for them, they know, I'm making sense, or she heard me. But sometimes I just need to process my
process. Oh yeah, I love that.
Fascinating.
That's
Peter,
a power play also. That's a power play, being quiet.
Well, I think this is probably a topic for another, but what just occurred to me, Shelley, as you were speaking, I was like, because I am, for my position, but I think just also in general, I think I have the privilege of being a little clueless about office politics. And what I was just wondering is, to what extent of you as people of color have had to have more of a PhD in this subject compared to my grade school understanding of office politics. And I think we would, our guest would be an old woman in the green room by the time we scratch the surface.
I'm gonna give her an introduction. We have Niven Postma here. I mean, she's amazing. Okay, she's held executive positions since she was 29, in a career that spanned multiple sectors and roles. Before starting up her own consultancy and embarking on her PhD in organizational behavior, her positions included being CEO of the Businesswomen's Association, head of the SRB Academy at the South African Reserve Bank, and head of leadership and culture for the Standard Bank Group, the largest bank by assets in Africa. Having started her career as a strategy consultant, she is now a strategy and culture facilitator for global clients in industries as diverse as financial services, retail, media, and manufacturing. She's a Harvard Business Review contributor and Inc. contributor, and a part-time tutor at Cambridge University's Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and an expert lecturer and facilitator on women's leadership development programs around the world. Niven serves as the chairman of the board of Kotlins, an NGO that does cutting-edge work in the early childhood development space in South Africa and beyond. So here she is, without further ado. Welcome, Niven.
Oh, such a pleasure, Linwood. Thank you. And it was fabulous listening to that conversation. You and I said when we were prepping, and you said, you'll probably listen for about half an hour and then we'll call you in. I said, no, I'll have to come in earlier than half an hour. I'm telling you now, I bet you that people have got this wrong. But actually, there's a whole bunch of awareness and nuanced understanding in what I was hearing. yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that people have got right, particularly Shelley and Kim. I mean, Peter, you acknowledge that you're in grade school, and Lenwood, you acknowledge that there were a lot of things that you got horribly wrong.
Not just
Shelley
in
and Kim, I
office
think you've nailed
politics.
a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Not just in office politics am I in grade school. To be clear. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my sense too, as they were, I didn't know, but it seemed like, boy, wow, Shelley and Kim really,
We've
really
been through
are
some things,
on
y'all.
top of
We've
it.
been through some things.
I refer to it as occupational hazard, right? Like it sort of happens as a result of that. So,
yeah.
But welcome, Niven. I'm excited that you're with us.
Yeah, well, me too. So, occupational hazards, trials by fire, crucible experiences. I mean, we can add to the list. And just looking at my very busy page of notes here, I think maybe just take a few minutes to give some thoughts to what you were saying. So the first one was, it reminded me of a comment that I got from a colleague on LinkedIn when I first started doing this work. And he said, yeah, Niven, when this stuff works for us, well, then it's strategy. It's only when it works against us. It's that politics. And of course, the moment you spit out the word politics, well, then you've got everyone's attention and everyone's sympathy. Because yes, isn't that stuff so horrible and so unfair? It is the same stuff. It's just, are you benefiting from it? Do you understand it? Do you see the potential and the sense in it? Or are you sitting there tearing your hair out in frustration and confusion as to how does this flipping stuff work? And it feels like I'm on the losing side of it. Well, then it becomes politics. I think the second thing is, I love the point that you were making, that this is endemic in organizations. And I think it certainly has higher stakes, and it becomes more complex the more senior you get. Because the more senior you get, the more it is that the people below you are doing the actual work. You're having to navigate the landscape for time, for attention, for resources, for support, for energy. That doesn't happen in the technical realm. That happens in the relational and the political realm. And like I say, just to amplify, we are impacted by this at all levels of an organization. So it reminded me also of when I was in Lagos in Nigeria a few years ago. And I mean, their traffic is talk about a crucible experience. Sit in a traffic Lagos. And there was this huge billboard on the side of the road. As I was sitting going nowhere, I was becoming an old woman in that traffic. And this huge billboard, I think it was actually from a cell phone company, but I forget. And it said, "You're not in the traffic, you are the traffic." Wow, that's pretty deep for a billboard. And it's the same with politics. It is happening all around you. And how you are showing up, whether you're labeling it politics, whether you're not, you are having an impact in a situation and in a system that's impacting you. I think the third thing was, I loved what Kim said about relationships. I think for me, politics and political skill and political capital really boils down to four things. Absolutely, it's about your strategic relationships. And to pick up on the point that you guys were making, we tend to think that a strategic relationship is only someone more senior and more important. Nonsense. That's taking things at face value and thinking the organogram is the only version of reality. Exactly to your point. The persuaders, the gatekeepers. I always say to people, who do you think are some of the most powerful people in organizations? And I have yet to have a group not get the answer, sometimes after a little while. But inevitably, somebody twigs that the right answer is the personal assistants, the PAs, the executive assistants. And why? Well, because they are gatekeepers. They are gatekeepers who will give you or prevent you getting access to people. They have access to information. They have access to the ear of someone in power. You are quite stupid if you get on the wrong side of a PA, because you think, well, they're not that important. They're hugely important. And so taking things purely at face value, big mistake. So it is about your strategic relationships. It is about your power, the formal authority that you have, and therefore the access to the resources, the decision rights, the access to other people that power gives you. It's also about your influence. And I'll get to that. And the last one is, it is about your reputation. what do you have a reputation for? And absolutely, you know, all of us probably feel hugely uncomfortable at being this self-promoting narcissist who's so obnoxious your ego enters the room a minute before you do. Yeah, no, thanks. But at the other extreme is the reality that invisible contributions have very little value.
Wow.
And you know,
That's powerful.
Aristotle.
I'm writing it down. Invisible
Oh, good.
contributions have thank you.
So I think, you know, Aristotle spoke about virtue theory over 2,000 years ago, that a virtue is something between two vices. And so being self-aggrandizing to the point of being all bluster and no substance, that's a vice. Being invisible and treating work like school, that's a vice. In the middle of those two vices is the virtue of understanding your value, understanding your leverage, and seeking to maximize it through your relationships, through your reputation, not just for yourself. And you guys touched on this. This is not just about you. This is about your team that is counting on you, your stakeholders that are counting on you. And I suppose the last thing to just build on what you were saying and bring to your point, Peter, is, gosh, I have met so many people, myself included, who have a serious butt problem at work. So they have all the technical skills, but they don't have the right support. They have the exact right answer, but they don't have the right people backing them. And so for me, it's often about, look, ideally you can have both. But if you have to choose between being right and being effective, for heaven's sake, be effective. Work your way through an organization, getting the support that you need. Because again, work not being like school means that there are multiple perspectives on what the right answer is. And often that's a function of who's got the power. And so how do you get a both and? That's first prize. You are right and you're effective. But heavens, I can tell you plenty of times in my career, I was technically exactly right.
Yeah.
But I was spectacularly ineffective because I thought the answer was enough. You know, I thought the answer was so obvious. My expertise was so obvious that these things would speak for themselves. They don't. You have to have the right support.
Well, it is definitely, your expertise is obvious to us, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, you know, fascinating. I mean,
I wish you'd been some of my managers sometimes. I mean, I also think I'm brilliant.
But really, really fascinating stuff. I mean, what can we do to be more effective? I mean, can we be more planful or more thoughtful? Like systematically, I'm saying, what could we do to manage office politics better?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's always three stages. The very first stage is to actually have an awareness of this stuff. And I think it was you, Shelley, who was saying stuff is around you all the time. It is actually happening. Yeah. It is. You're not going to escape it. Yeah. So that awareness that this is inevitable, that awareness that it is a space that is much bigger than just the toxic and the Machiavellian. I mean, of course that can happen, and it's dreadful when it does. But it is a much bigger space of influence and relationships and support and information than what we often define it as. You know, we have a single story, and that single story is negative and pejorative and limited. Actually, if you make it a bigger story, opportunities come in where it doesn't have to be about getting effective in the space at the expense of selling your soul. Actually, on my terms, how do I build these things effectively? And so I think really just expanding our understanding of what this stuff is, that it does matter. It makes a profound difference to your career and, as I said, to your team success. That is in and of itself, I think, already a victory, because so many people are just viscerally allergic to this stuff. And so they shut themselves off from the possibilities in getting good at this, in getting good at on your own terms. And as part of that, I mean, I was really interested when you guys were talking about the games. You know, you need to learn to play the game. Actually, I'd probably add to that, and I would say you need to want to learn to play the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you've got such a restricted view Well, anybody who doesn't consider themselves a psychopath, of course, is going to run away screaming. No, but there's more to it than that. And so for me, I always say, look, this is always about choices. It's about your career. You can choose absolutely not to get involved in the informal side where politics play out, to just take things at face value, just take things as you see them in the formal side. The delegations of authority, the organogram. I mean, these things are real and they matter, but just as real is the informal. And so you can choose not to get involved in that space of positioning and building relationships and meetings before meetings. You can choose to believe that the decision gets made in the meeting. Yeah, sometimes it does. Often it happens before the meeting. All of these are your choices, but frankly, choosing not to get involved in the informal side. Well, to use your metaphor, it's like it's playing a game on half the field.
Yeah.
It's playing soccer on half the pitch, because that informal side is just as important, sometimes more important. So that awareness, I think, is critical. I think the second step is then assessment. Okay, so this is what it is. This is what it takes. And this is who I am relative to that. Now, how close or how far am I from what I'm wanting to do and what I'm wanting to be, which is hopefully effective. And thanks for downloading my workbook. I mean, there's a whole bunch of exercises in there, and we live in the 21st century. Google, what does it take to be effective over and above my exercises?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here, folks.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah, valuable stuff. And then the last one is, look, this is about action. This is not a trait that you're born with. This is a skill that you develop, hopefully because you want to develop, and then you start to put into action. What is your strategy in this context right now? What are some of the things that you've learned that are really better off not repeated? And yes, often that comes from naivety. You're just woefully ignorant about this stuff. Okay, so then how are you going to adapt your behavior? How are you going to show up in a way that is more appropriate, more useful for what you're trying to get done?
Yeah, great.
So to what extent is office politics and the need to be politic a result of ineffective and unbalanced power structures within the organization? And I'm particularly thinking about Shelley and Kim's vast understanding of politics because they've had to in order to be heard, and Lenwood's understanding and my ignorance of it. I mean, there's a difference between the three of us that might be very obvious. Between the four of us, it might be very obvious. And what I was thinking of is I had an investor, and I realized whenever I presented an idea to him, he would shoot it down. And then one day, I was walking by a conference room, and it was a direction and a connection that I thought he should make. And he called me into the conference room and he said, "What was the name of that person you thought I should talk to?" And what had happened was somebody else, one of his trusted advisors, had mentioned this person in the industry who I knew very well. And suddenly, that idea was valid. And it was an important lesson for me. So now I knew, okay, when I have an idea, do not speak to my investor directly. I want to casually mention it to the people he listened to so they could bring it up as their idea. And then he would then bring it to me and I'd be like, that's a good idea. Because I just wanted to get it done.
Exactly.
But I mean, that literally put 3 and 4 weeks tagged on to the from idea to action, and I can't even begin to imagine what my colleagues here have had to go through in order just to have their voice be heard. It seems like so much of a waste of time, and I think to what extent can organizations dismantle the need for that? And I know everyone who is a decision maker needs a little something to get over the line. And so I know that won't go away, but it also seems like such a monumental waste of time, energy, and resources.
Yeah. So, Peter, I think that's most people's perceptions of this. What a distraction from the real work. What junk is this? And I think for me, somebody said to me a while ago, look, politics are a symptom of a bad culture, an inefficient culture. So Steve Jobs, for example, was famous for saying, look, I have no time for politics in Apple, and just let's cut to the chase and get things done. In my experience, in my research, I think bad politics are a symptom of a bad culture.
Yeah.
But politics happen in all cultures. Now, you can call it something very different. You can call it socializing. You can call it
Culture.
laying the groundwork. You can call it culture.
Exactly.
You can call it whatever you want. But this is the same stuff. And so, I think what you have to ask yourself is not, well, where can I go to some magical place where I'm going to escape this? But what is the degree of politics in this context? How politicized is this organization? And then to what extent do I want to up my skills to be effective in that? So, for example, if you are woefully politically inept, going into a highly politicized organization, a large organization, a matrixed organization, an old organization, the reality is that most of what happens in the informal space. And if you are not wanting to or prepared to play in that space, that is entirely your right. But you're going to probably be eaten up and spat out, because that's just how things work around here. And so, yes, power, absolutely, and power imbalances and power asymmetry. I mean, yes, this is the nature not just of organizations, but of the world. And I think, interestingly, my PhD is around answering the question, which is a big, hotly debated question. Are organizational politics different for women? Because on the one hand, there's evidence that says women are even more allergic to the stuff than men are. On the other hand, no, we do it. We just call it something different because the connotations are so pejorative. And so I think anytime you are, from a power point of view, the other, the outsider, and I mean, I've been in other ones, and it had nothing to do with the obvious ones of race and gender. It had everything to do with the fact that I hadn't been in this organization for 30 years. The inner club had, and they were completely different races and genders. I mean, across the board, a very diverse group. But they would say, we've grown up together. No, I am not going to penetrate that inner circle after 30 years of growing up together, no matter how effective I am with my technical stuff. And so there's a very interesting Harvard Business Review article that came out in January last year. Briefly, what it says is, the title is Why Some People Pay Toll Fees at Work and Other People Cruise the Open Highway, which is an incredibly powerful metaphor. But what they talk about is, when you are the other, and race and gender are systemic otherings in most organizations, you pay 3 toll fees. The first one is the toll fee of opportunity. So you don't necessarily get to hear about this stuff because you're not in the conversations that are informally around like for like. The second one is, well, you may get the opportunity, but you don't have the influence in the room because of, for example, your experience, Peter. I hear what he's saying, but actually there's somebody whose opinion I trust more for whatever reason. And my favorite example of this is Ben Barres, who died a few years ago. He was a neuroscientist at Stanford. In fact, I think he headed up the neurosurgery department. So, I mean, Stanford, neuroscientist. We're not talking splashing in the shallow end of the intellect.
Right, yeah.
Smart human being. And what was particularly interesting about his very interesting career was that in 1997, he transitioned from being a woman neuroscientist, Barbara Barres, to being a male neuroscientist, Ben Barres, and then he lived out his life as a man. And in one of the interviews I read about him, somebody asked him, gosh, of course there's multiple differences between being a man and a woman, but, what was the one that stood out the most for you? He said, I still, after 20 years, can't get over the thrill as a male neuroscientist of not being interrupted by another male surgeon, actually being able to complete my thought.
Wow.
The smallest of things.
That's what the toll fee of influence is about. And then the last one is the toll fee of scrutiny. You're not seen as an individual. You're seen as representative of a type and an unusual type. So there's so much more watching happening in terms of what you're doing. And so, you can throw up your hands in horror and say, well, that shouldn't happen. And of course, in an ideal world, it wouldn't. But in this world, you have to understand that those things are real. And therefore, even more so, you have to find ways to be effective around them.
Wow. I love that point you made earlier about being the choice between being right or being effective.
Yeah.
And so there are times when I know the answer, but, and I want to be right, but I have to sacrifice that for the long-term goal. Maybe the long-term goal is pushing a project over the hill or getting a approval, etc. Yeah. I'm actually in the situation right now where it's very similar, where it's like I know the answer and I know this is the right way to do it. But for politics' sake, I'm going to have to think of a different approach. Yep. And it's because I understand how politics works. And I think there are times when I think for the folks who are not in the room where the decisions are being made, right? And I say this as I am actually a lot of times in the room. So I'm just, just being honest, right? But for the folks who are not in the room, it could come off as being like, unfair, like I don't get why, and they go into the spin of I don't understand why. Part of it is like forget that part of it. Here's the information. What are you going to do with it so you can get to that long-term goal, whatever that, so focusing on the objective or focusing on the goal or what are you trying to solve for, and just being willing to or be flexible and understand that it's not going to come in this in this particular way, but maybe it's doing it differently or whatever it is. So I wanted to get your thoughts for those employees who cannot say, I was saying this before we got started, the folks who are dealing with politics right now and they can't drop a question because we're on LinkedIn. But how do you navigate if you're not in that room, you have no access to the room, and yet you're trying to understand like how do you reach those long-term goals? How do you talk to those folks?
How much time do we have? So I think there's a few things. Carla Harris, who I think is the chairperson of Morgan Stanley, I mean, she's got a fantastic TED Talk about getting people in the room for you. And her TED Talk echoes advice that I was given earlier in my career. Sadly, I didn't always take this advice, but that's another story. Where somebody said, some of the most important decisions of your career are going to be made when you are not in the room. So who is in the room for you? What are they saying? And for heaven's sake, if you think your work is going to speak for itself in that room, think again. Okay, your work is not speaking. People are speaking. So who? And so she expands on it, I think, in beautiful ways in that TED Talk around exactly this point. We think decisions in the room about bonuses, about promotions are rational. No, they're personal. And who's saying what for you? So you may not be in the room, but who's going to be in that room for you? Who has your back? Who is prepared to lobby for you? And so mentors are incredibly valuable, but I think there's a lot of evidence, and certainly from your experience, you were mentioning it. Sponsors are even more important because sponsors are the people who put themselves out there for you. They expend their social, their political, their reputational capital on your behalf. A mentor, I mean, I can meet for coffee with a mentor 100 times. Nobody's going to know. There's no risk involved. A sponsor, there's risk involved. And hoping that your manager is going to sponsor for you is a reasonable hope. It's often a misplaced hope. You need to have people more than your manager who are going to sponsor you and advocate for you. And how you do that, well, that depends on the context. That depends on the people and the personalities. How many of us were told as kids, treat people the way that you would want to be treated. Beautiful advice, but it's actually wrong. Treat them the way they want to be treated. How do they want to engage with you? What would it take for them to support you? And that's sometimes overt, and sometimes it's a little bit more covert, a little bit more, through people in the way that you spoke about, Peter. They're not going to favor the direct approach. Go some other route to get them on your side.
That reminds me, I was a coaching client that I was working with. She was a very senior investment banker. And when she was going for her managing director role, she made sure to influence the other people in the committee who she did not report to. And it was a very deliberate approach, so that should her name not come up in the room where they were discussing, she'd have at least one person who would say, "What about this person?" Unsurprisingly, she's a managing director, but yeah. But that's a
Well,
great
it
point.
reminds me of a woman who I met. She was in her early 40s. She was on Exco, so the top 5 of a 60,000 strong organization. Now, she had headed up a business unit, which was very successful. So, of course, that earned her all kinds of brownie points. But she just mentioned to me the one day, kind of casually, almost in passing, but gosh, it got my attention. She said, yeah, so like I said, she's now in her early 40s, or she was. But she said every month from when she had started working, so over 20 years, she would sit down at the beginning of every month and she would draw up a stakeholder matrix. Now, I mean, I don't know how formal this was, but the point is that she would sit and think, okay, who do I need to speak to this month? Who do I need to make contact with? Who do I need to present something to? Who do I need to ask for advice? Who do I need to invite for lunch? And this was an incredibly deliberate, intentional practice. This wasn't something she got to when she had time, when her inbox was empty,
Right.
i.e. never.
Yeah.
This was something she prioritized from the moment she started working. And, suddenly, as she told me this, I thought, your success is not surprising based on your technical delivery, but now it's completely obvious. You put in this degree of effort to your stakeholders and your relationships, making sure that people know about you and getting advice and support. Well, you take that with your technical abilities, and of course you are going to be as successful as you are.
And there are people who will look at all that work and say, oh, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But when you look at her progression and how quickly
Yeah.
she moved through that, the effectiveness of that work,
Yeah.
it's actually a huge time saver. So that's,
Yeah.
that's a really great point.
I mean, the return, I mean,
Yeah, I was thinking about, she was focused on the end goal, right?
Yeah.
I love
I'm
that.
listening to what everybody's saying, right? And in my mind, we hear the words, office politics, and I think what is so powerful, what you said at the beginning, which is right, when it works, it's strategy, and when it doesn't, it's politics, right? It brings absolute new meaning to like political strategy. I mean, what Shelley described is I got to have a strategy to deal with the politics that
That's right.
I am up against. And so when you think about leaders, coaches such as us, like a couple of things, competencies, what are the things that you're saying at all times? This is where your brain needs to be clicked on if you're trying to design your strategy to handle the politics.
So I think the first thing is to just make sure you're in the right environment. So, for example, I have a friend who a few months ago was recruiting for a very senior executive position. And, the salary and the bonus and the share options, I mean, these were hygiene factors. She was going to get them wherever she went. So the deciding factor, the deciding question for her was asking herself, do I want to become like these people?
Wow.
And frankly, if the answer is no, run. You're in the wrong place.
Right.
Similarly, if you're in a toxic environment, get out, okay? Trying to be effective in a place that you're not wanting to be in, not wanting to become like, not wanting to be effective in, you're never going to find the energy to do that. But then assuming you are in the right place, then how are you framing this? So it comes back to the point we were making earlier. Call it what, I mean, I'm the one getting a PhD in the subject who's writing books on this. I better know what this technically is. For everybody else, call it whatever you want. Call it building my strategic relationships. Call it being effective in the informal space. Call it managing my, whatever you call it, you've got to call it something that gives you energy, that makes you feel like this is something worth doing, as opposed to, got to go into the office and play politics. I mean, who's going to jump out of bed to do that? But going to work to be effective with the key stakeholders that I need to get this over the line so that my team and I get the benefit, that's a very different approach. So I think how you frame it determines, as with most things, the energy you are or aren't going to put into it. And then be intentional about it, be deliberate about it. Understand that this is particularly, Lenwood, to your point, particularly the more senior you get, this isn't a distraction from your work. Actually, no, I think, Peter, you said it. This isn't a distraction from your work. This is your work. And so if you understand that this is not peripheral distraction, but a central function and component of how you're going to be able to make things happen or not, well, then I think you also give it a different level and degree of importance, and hopefully then consequently apply a disproportionate level of attention and energy to it. but yeah, for me, it's really about recognizing, first of all, the inescapability of this, the centrality of this to all organizations, even if the nature is different, and the importance of this. This will make or break all manner of things that you're able to have happen, and therefore, consequently, your career. Now, you can choose not to want to have a career. Yeah, I just come to work to get my job done, pay the bills. My real life is outside of work. Fine. Again, that's your choice. But if you are making different choices around your career, then for heaven's sake, make those choices be informed choices. I am choosing to sit this out, and I understand the implications and the risks and the trade-offs. I am choosing to sit this out not because I have a single view of this, but because I have a bigger view. I still don't want to get involved. Fine.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
This needs to be a masterclass. I know we've been talking a lot from an experienced person, an experienced professional experience, but I was just thinking about all the young folks who might be coming out of college and going into their first job. That this is, y'all need to have this on repeat.
Yeah,
come back and watch the repeat.
When you were telling that story about the woman who had made it, to the top of that organization, I said, she must have gotten that somewhere.
Yeah.
A parent or someone near her.
Yeah.
And that was just a tremendous head start. So
yes. And it's funny, Shirley, I mean, you were saying you watched your dad and you learned from him how to do this in a way that you could still admire him and do things that mattered. Not even a few days ago, I was speaking to a woman who had completely the opposite advice from her parents. Listen, my sweetheart, go to work, put your head down, just don't get involved in the politics. Because if you don't lift your head up above the firing line, no one can take it out. And so we can always unlearn things, of course. But those formative impressions and experiences and pieces of advice, they can also stay with us for a very long time, forever, and never be examined, never be contradicted.
Yeah. And you can take what, the things that you've said here. Do you have a book? I think you have a book, right?
I do. Yes, it is called, and I mean, this is a genius title if you ask me. It is called "If You Don't Do Politics, Politics Will Do You."
I love that.
Right?
I love that.
We can take that, wherever we are in our career, we can take this knowledge and we can turn things around. We can do something different, right? That's my suggestion. I did have one other question, which was going to the point of a statement you made. It was about, this is how things work around here, and whether that maybe holds some people back, that kind of thinking.
So help me understand a bit more what the concern is.
Well, I'm thinking of just about organizations and how they're facing change. And I was just thinking about, when you were talking, it was reminding me of some of the things that Greg Sittel, he was on the show. He was talking about how you need to build consensus before going into meetings and having majority of people already with you when you go in a meeting to get things done. And then you described this place where it was like a small group of people that's just kind of said, this is how we do things around here. And if you're hearing that a lot in an organization, especially at this particular time, maybe you want to go someplace where they're not thinking that way.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's an important question. It's an important point. And I mean, certainly if I think of the time in my experience in my career where I got seriously burned, I was brought in by the CEOs with a very explicit change mandate. And this is a company that had publicly tried to change a number of times. And I asked the CEO, how's this time different? No, this time is different. Well, nonsense, it actually wasn't. And on the one hand, that was their stuff. But on the other hand, my naivety was my stuff, because I thought, well, this is the job description. You told me you want to change. You came to me for my skills. I'm going to change it. It doesn't work like that. Again, in an ideal world, a more efficient world, maybe it would work like that. But coming in with a change initiative when there are seriously vested interests, despite an ostensible senior commitment to change, you've got to really navigate that landscape and decide if you're up for it, because it is going to take way more work than you think.
Wow, great. Well, our hour's almost up. Thank you so much for joining us, Niven. This has been fascinating. I love it.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you agreed to come on. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
Such a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
do I want to become like them? That was huge takeaway for me.
Huge
Yeah.
takeaway.
Oh, I've got a long note.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Have a great
much.
weekend, everyone.
You guys too. Cheers, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.